Come closer. Let the fire hold back the dark, just a little longer." The sky above the village hung low and gray, heavy with rain that refused to fall. Inside the old church, a weak hymn barely reached the rafters. Candles flickered, though no wind stirred. At the front, in a coffin lined with white cloth, lay Elder Samuel, the oldest man the village had ever known. Pastor Daniel stood beside the casket, Bible in hand, ready to speak. When Samuel's dead hand shot up and seized his wrist, the church erupted. Screams tore through the air. Someone fainted. Samuel's eyes snapped open, wide, wet, and terrified. His grip was iron. "Don't let them bury me."
"Don't let them
he
bury
rasped,
me."
staring only at Daniel. "They're hiding something beneath this church. The chest, beneath the floor." His hand went limp, but his eyes stayed open. In the terrible silence that followed, every soul in that church felt the same freezing thought. Whatever was under their feet had just woken up. And at the back of the church, Bishop Victor Lawson watched it all with folded hands and practiced sorrow. But his eyes were fixed on Daniel, and they were not grieving. They were calculating. If this story has already pulled you in, take a moment now, subscribe, tap that like button, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. Because what Daniel is about to uncover will change how you see every quiet village, every ordinary church, every kind smile, forever. The doctor confirmed what everyone already knew. Samuel's heart had simply stopped. An old man, worn thin by 90-some years of life, finally giving out. Natural causes. Nothing more. But Daniel could not make himself believe it. For 3 days, Samuel's final words echoed in his mind while he moved through the motions of mourning, receiving condolences he barely heard, comforting a congregation he could not fully comfort, holding Grace at night while she cried softly against his chest. "He was old, Daniel," Grace whispered on the second night, her fingers tracing slow circles against his back. "Old men say strange things when death is close. You know this." "I know what I heard," Daniel said quietly, staring at the ceiling. He wasn't confused, Grace. He was afraid. There's a difference. Grace lifted her head, studying his face in the dim lamplight. "Afraid of what?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't have one. Not yet. But something in him, something that had guided him through 15 years of ministry, told him that Samuel's final warning had not been the ramblings of a dying mind. It had been a confession he never got the chance to finish. On the morning of the burial, the sky finally broke its promise. Thin rain fell over the cemetery behind the church as villagers gathered in black, umbrellas raised, voices low. Daniel stood at the graveside, watching the wooden casket lowered into the red earth. Samuel's final words looping endlessly behind his eyes. The chest, beneath the floor. Don't let them what? He lifted his gaze from the grave, and across the crowd of mourners, his eyes met Bishop Victor's. The bishop smiled at him, warm, gentle, the smile of a shepherd comforting a grieving pastor. But it did not reach his eyes. And in that single, unblinking moment, Daniel understood with cold certainty that whatever Samuel had tried to tell him, whatever secret he had carried to his grave, someone in that churchyard already knew exactly what it was, and they intended to keep it buried. The rain did not stop for a week. Daniel told himself he would let it go, that grief had made him imagine meaning where there was none. But every night, when the house grew quiet and Grace's breathing slowed into sleep, he found himself in his study, pulling down box after box of old church records, searching for something he couldn't yet name. The deeper he looked, the less sense any of it made. The church's founding date shifted depending on which ledger he consulted, 1961 in one, 1958 in another. The names of the original missionaries changed too, one document crediting a Reverend Okafor, another insisting no such man had ever existed. And in nearly every folder, at the exact point where the land records should have described how the church acquired its ground, the pages simply stopped. Torn out. Not lost. Removed. He sat back in his chair, rain tapping against the window, and felt something cold settle low in his stomach. Someone had done this on purpose. Sarah noticed it before she understood what she was looking at. She had only gone into the old storage room to find replacement hymnals, a task as unremarkable as any other Tuesday afternoon. But behind a stack of broken pews, she found 3 wooden boxes she had never seen before, their hinges rusted shut, cobwebs thick across the lids. Curiosity, and perhaps something else she couldn't name, made her open them. Inside, handwritten ledgers, brittle with age. The ink faded to the color of dried blood. She flipped through page after page of names, dates, land descriptions, until her fingers stopped on something strange. A hand-drawn map, crude, half-finished, the edges scorched as though someone had tried to burn it and changed their mind halfway through. It showed the church, and beneath it, drawn in shaky ink, an arrow pointing straight down into the earth, with 3 words scrawled beside it. "Do not open." Her hands trembled as she closed the box. She knew, without being able to explain how, that this was not something she was meant to find. She brought it to Daniel that same evening, wrapped in a cloth like something dangerous. "I don't know what it means," she admitted, watching his face as he studied the map by lamplight. "But Pastor Daniel, I don't think I was supposed to find it." Daniel said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked up at her, and Sarah saw in his eyes the same thing she'd felt holding that box. The unshakable certainty that something was very wrong beneath their feet. If this story is starting to unsettle you the way it unsettled Sarah, comment below and tell me what you think Samuel was trying to protect. And if you haven't yet, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Bishop Victor visited 2 days later, unannounced, his black car gliding up the muddy road as though the rain didn't dare touch it. He greeted Daniel with the same warmth he always did, a firm handshake, a broad smile, an arm around the shoulder like an old friend, checking in on a grieving colleague. They sat in Daniel's small office, tea steaming between them, and for a while the conversation was exactly what it appeared to be. Condolences, church business, the weather. Then Victor set down his cup, and something in his eyes shifted. "I hear you've been spending long nights in the archive room, Daniel." Daniel kept his voice even. "Just organizing records, Bishop. After Samuel's passing, I thought it was time." Victor nodded slowly, studying him with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. Not suspicion exactly, but something closer to disappointment. "Grief makes us search for meaning in strange places. I understand that better than most." "Is that what you think I'm doing? Searching for meaning?" Victor's smile did not waver, but his eyes went cold. "I think, Daniel, that some questions destroy more people than answers ever could. I have watched good men, faithful men, tear apart everything they built, chasing shadows that were never worth catching." He rose, buttoning his coat, and paused at the door. Samuel was an old man. Old men fear death, and fear makes them say things that sound like revelation, but are only static. Let him rest, Daniel. Let the church rest. Some ground is better left undisturbed. He left without waiting for a response, his car disappearing back down the muddy road, as quietly as it had come. Daniel stood at the window long after the sound of the engine had faded, Victor's words settling over him like a weight. Some ground is better left undisturbed. He looked toward the church, its steeple dark against the gray sky, and felt, for the first time, real fear. Not for himself, but for whatever truth was waiting beneath that floor. Because a man like Victor did not warn people away from nothing. He warned them away from something he could not afford for them to find. Joshua found him still standing at the window an hour after Victor's car had gone. "Pastor Daniel?" The young man hovered in the doorway, hesitant. He had grown up in this church, had been baptized in its font, confirmed at its altar. He trusted Daniel the way he trusted very few people in his life. "You've been standing there a long time." Daniel didn't turn around right away. When he finally did, there was something in his face Joshua had never seen before. Not grief, not the quiet steadiness of a man who buried the dead every year of his ministry. Fear. "Joshua," Daniel said slowly, "how well do you know the floor beneath the sanctuary?" Joshua blinked. "The floor? I mean, I've swept it 1,000 times, Pastor." "Why?" "Because I think there's something under it, and I think Bishop Victor knows exactly what." He told Joshua everything then. Samuel's final words, the torn pages, Sarah's map with its scorched edges and its warning scrawled in shaking ink. He watched the color drain slowly from the younger man's face as the pieces came together. "You want to go down there?" Joshua said finally. Not a question. "Tonight," Daniel said, "before Victor decides to make sure we never get the chance." They waited until the village slept, until even the dogs had gone quiet, and let themselves into the church through the side door Daniel had used for 15 years of early prayers and late-night counsel. Joshua carried a lantern, its flame small and trembling, casting long shadows across the empty pews. The map led them to the far corner beneath the altar, where the floorboards had always seemed slightly uneven, a detail Daniel had walked past 1,000 times without ever once wondering why. Now, kneeling in the dark with his fingers pressed against the wood, he understood. The boards were not warped. They were a door. It took both of them to pry it loose, the old wood groaning in protest, decades of dust rising into the lantern light like disturbed spirits. Beneath it, a staircase, carved crudely into raw earth, descending into a darkness so complete it seemed to swallow the lantern's glow before it could travel more than a few feet. Joshua's breath came fast and shallow. "Pastor, are we sure about this?" Daniel looked at the stairs, then back at the church above them, the sanctuary where he had preached grace and forgiveness for 15 years, never once suspecting what silence lay coiled beneath his feet. "Samuel spent his last breath warning me not to let them bury the truth," he said quietly. "I owe him at least this much." They descended. The chamber at the bottom was smaller than Daniel expected, the air thick with the smell of earth and something older. Old paper, old wax, old secrets left to rot in the dark. The lantern light found a wooden door set into the far wall, its surface carved with symbols neither of them recognized, spirals and markings that belonged to no faith either man had ever studied. Beside the door, a metal chest, its lock rusted but intact, sealed shut by decades of undisturbed silence. Joshua reached for it first, his hands trembling. "Should we?" A sound above them. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crossing the sanctuary floor directly overhead. Both men froze. Daniel's heart hammered against his ribs as he grabbed Joshua's arm and pulled him back into the shadows beside the staircase, extinguishing the lantern with a pinch of his fingers. Darkness swallowed them whole. Above, the footsteps paused directly over the hidden door, lingering, as though whoever walked there could sense the disturbance in the floor, the two intruders holding their breath in the dark beneath. Then, slowly, the footsteps moved away. A door closed somewhere above. Silence returned. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his hands shaking as he relit the lantern. "We need to go," he whispered. "Now, before whoever that was comes back with more than footsteps." They left the chest unopened, resealing the hidden door as carefully as they'd found it, erasing every trace of their passage. But as they climbed back into the sanctuary, hearts still racing, Daniel could not shake the image of those carved symbols, that ancient lock, waiting in the dark for someone brave enough, or foolish enough, to finally open it. 3 nights passed before Daniel worked up the courage to return. He told no one but Joshua and Sarah, not Grace, not yet, though the secret sat on his chest like a stone every time he looked at her across the dinner table. He told himself it was to protect her. He wondered, in his more honest moments, if it was really to protect himself from the fear in her eyes, if she truly understood what he was chasing. This time, they brought tools, a hammer, an old chisel Joshua had found in the church's storage shed, a flashlight instead of the dying lantern. This time, they were not turning back. The chest resisted them at first, the rusted lock stubborn with age. But 3 sharp strikes of the hammer split it apart, and the lid groaned open on hinges that hadn't moved in decades. Inside, papers, dozens of them, yellowed and brittle, bound in cracked leather folders. Photographs, their edges curling. A stack of letters tied with string gone gray with dust. Daniel lifted the first folder with hands that were not entirely steady. Missionary journals, real ones, written in a hand that matched nothing in the church's official records. As he read, the true history of Hope of Redemption Church unfolded before him like a wound reopening after years of poor healing. The church had not been built on land blessed by missionaries, as every villager had been taught since childhood. It had been built on land that belonged to the village itself. Sacred communal ground, held in trust for generations, until a group of ambitious men, hungry for control and legitimacy, had seized it through forged documents and quiet threats against anyone who might object. And they had used the church itself, its authority, its moral weight, to make the theft untouchable. Daniel's hands shook as he turned to the photographs. Faces he didn't recognize at first, until he did. A younger Bishop Victor, barely more than a boy, standing beside an older man whose eyes were unmistakably the same as his father, and beside them both, a signature on a land document that made Daniel's blood run cold. The theft hadn't started with Victor, it had started with his father, and Victor had spent his entire life protecting a lie he was born into. "Daniel!" Joshua's voice, tight with urgency, pulled him from the documents. He was holding a letter, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. "You need to read this." It was addressed to no one. Or rather, Daniel realized with a chill, it was addressed to whoever finally found the courage to come looking. "If you are reading this, then you have done what I could never do in time. I am Samuel. Though by the time you find this, that name may mean nothing to you but a stone in a churchyard. I have known the truth for 60 years. I have carried it like a coal in my chest, burning me a little more with every Sunday I sat in that sanctuary and watched good people worship on stolen ground. I tried once to speak. I was young then, and foolish enough to believe the truth alone would be enough. It was not. I was silenced, not with violence, but with shame, with doubt, with the quiet machinery men like Victor's father used to make truth-tellers question their own memories. After that, I waited. I watched every pastor who came through these doors, searching for one honest enough, brave enough, stubborn enough to finish what I could not. I believe that is you. Forgive me for the burden I have left at your feet. Forgive me for waiting until my last breath to speak at all. But do not let them bury this a second time. This Druid village deserves its ground back. God's house was never meant to stand on a foundation of stolen earth. Finish it, whoever you are. Please. Samuel Daniel lowered the letter, his throat too tight to speak. Beside him, Joshua wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, saying nothing. Above them, muffled by earth and stone, the church bell began to ring, though it was well past midnight, and no one should have been there to ring it. If Samuel's letter moved you the way it moved Daniel, tell me in the comments, and stay close, because everything Daniel does next will put his family, his ministry, and his life on the line. Bishop Victor came to him one final time, and this time he did not bother with tea. He sat across from Daniel in the small office, his composure a fraction thinner than before, a muscle working in his jaw that betrayed the calm he still tried to wear like a coat. "There is a church in the capital," Victor said without preamble. "Larger than anything you could build here in a lifetime. A congregation of thousands, national recognition. I could have you there within the month." He leaned forward. "All I ask, Daniel, is that whatever you believe you found beneath that floor, you leave it there. Let the dead keep their secrets." Samuel wasn't keeping a secret, Daniel said quietly. He was trying to confess one. Yours. Something flickered behind Victor's eyes. Not anger, but something closer to grief, quickly buried. "My father built something out of very little, Pastor. He gave this village a church, a school, a hospital wing. Yes, the land was taken. I am not proud of how it began. But look at what stands there now. Would you truly tear down decades of good to punish a sin committed before either of us were born?" "That's not my choice to make," Daniel said. "It belongs to the people whose land it was." Victor studied him for a long moment, then rose without another word. The offer, and the threat beneath it, left unclaimed on the table between them. What followed was swift and merciless. Rumors spread first, that Daniel had lost his mind grieving Samuel, that he was digging up old lies to destroy a church that had done nothing but good. Congregants who had known him for years began to avoid his eyes on Sunday mornings. Elder Ruth, once his fiercest supporter, called an emergency meeting and voted, reluctantly, to suspend him from the pulpit until this matter is resolved. Joshua was attacked one night walking home, beaten badly enough to spend 3 days in the village clinic, though he refused, even through swollen lips, to say who had done it. Sarah lost her position as church secretary within the week, dismissed for unrelated administrative reasons that fooled no one. Nathan, the journalist Daniel had quietly reached out to, found his small office ransacked, his notes scattered, his hard drive missing. And at home, Grace held their daughter close each night and did not ask Daniel to stop. But he saw the fear living permanently now behind her eyes, and it broke something in him he wasn't sure would ever fully heal. "They're trying to bury us, the way they buried the truth," he told her one night, exhausted, defeated. Grace took his face in her hands. "Then don't let them. But Daniel, I need you to come back to me when this is over, whatever it costs. Promise me that much." He promised. He did not know, yet, if he could keep it. Inspector Michael Lawson had begun the investigation, expecting to find exactly what Bishop Victor's allies whispered into his ear. A grieving pastor unraveling under pressure, manufacturing a conspiracy to cope with loss. But evidence, once he actually followed it, told a very different story. Forged land documents, decades-old payments routed through the diocese to silence a handful of village elders. A pattern of accidents and sudden disappearances stretching back generations, always around anyone who asked too many questions about the church's founding. He brought it, reluctantly, to retired Justice Edward Lawson, a man whose reputation for integrity had outlived his time on the bench by 20 years. The old judge read through the file in silence, then looked up with the weary expression of a man who had hoped, until this moment, that his country still had a few lies left undiscovered. "This is enough to bury a bishop," he said quietly. "The question is whether the truth will survive long enough to matter." It nearly didn't. Victor moved against Daniel through the courts, accusing him of trespass, of theft, of inciting unrest against the church. Charges serious enough that Daniel spent one long, terrifying night in a holding cell, unsure if he would see his daughter grow up outside prison walls. But Nathan, working from a hidden backup of his stolen files, published the story anyway. The journals, the letters, Samuel's final confession, laid bare for the entire nation to read. By morning, it could not be unpublished. By evening, it could not be denied. The underground chamber was opened officially, before cameras, before the village elders, before descendants of the very families whose land had been stolen 2 generations ago. Bishop Victor did not attend. He resigned that same week, his empire of quiet control collapsing under the weight of a truth that had waited 60 years to surface. The village rebuilt slowly, the way villages always do, not with grand ceremony, but with small, patient acts of repair. The land was formally returned to the community. Corrupt elders were removed from leadership. New elections brought new voices into rooms that had been closed for generations. Grace and Daniel found their way back to each other, scarred but steadier, the ordeal having burned away everything false between them and left only what was real. Daniel returned to the pulpit eventually, not as a man celebrated for exposing scandal, but as a humble shepherd of a congregation finally standing on honest ground. Years later, children played and laughed in the churchyard, where an old man's grave sat quiet beneath a young baobab tree, planted the season after the truth came out. Daniel, older now, silver threading through his hair, stood beside that grave in the soft light of evening. "They buried you, Samuel," he whispered, "but they could never bury the truth." The bell rang across the village as it had for generations, but now it rang over ground that belonged at last to the people who had always deserved it. Come closer, my children, and remember this before the fire burns low. A lie may sleep beneath the ground for many years, gathering dust, gathering silence. But the truth is like the baobab tree. No matter how long you bury its seed, one day, it will break through the earth for all to see.
Here is short summary of Pastor Daniel's story. At Elder Samuel's funeral, the dead man's hand rises from his coffin. With his last breath, he warns his pastor that something is buried beneath their church. And then he's gone. What Pastor Daniel uncovers over the following weeks is a 60-year secret. The church's sacred ground was never blessed by missionaries. It was stolen from the village itself, and the theft has been protected for generations by the very family that now leads the church. The cost of the truth is steep. Suspicion, suspension, violence against those who help him, even a night in a holding cell. But truth, once spoken, refuses to stay silent twice. A journalist, an honest investigator, and a retired judge bring it into the light, and the church is finally rebuilt on ground it can stand on honestly. Years later, an old pastor stands beside his friend's grave under a young baobab tree, proof that a buried truth is never gone, only waiting. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe, hit like, and drop a comment telling me what you'd have done in Daniel's shoes.